The sound of an old grandfather clock echoed through the empty halls of the White House. It was nearly midnight, and the corridors, usually bustling with staff and visitors, were eerily silent. Even the lights seemed dimmer tonight, their warmth unable to chase away the chill that had settled into the air. Inside the Oval Office, President Ethan Sullivan sat alone, his mind preoccupied with the mounting pressure of a country teetering on the edge of chaos. The world outside was in turmoil, but inside, the White House remained a sanctuary, a place of authority and control. Or so he believed. Tonight, however, something was different. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck prickled with a sense of unease that he couldn't explain. It was as if the very walls of the White House held a secret, one that had been buried for centuries. The president's fingers hovered over the desk, hesitating. There, in the corner of the room, beneath the portrait of George Washington, something flickered in the shadows. A soft whisper, barely audible, seemed to come from the very walls themselves. "Help me!" Ethan turned sharply toward the source of the sound, his heart skipping a beat. The room was empty. The clock ticked on, but the unease settled deeper within him. He dismissed the thought, chalking it up to stress, but a part of him knew this wasn't just his imagination. There was something in the White House. Something old, something dark. And it was waking up. President Ethan Sullivan was no stranger to pressure. He had spent the better part of his career climbing the political ladder, gaining respect, and ultimately securing the highest office in the land. The White House, for all its grandeur and history, had always been a symbol of power, a fortress of control. Yet tonight, as he sat behind the resolute desk, he could feel something he had never experienced before: vulnerability. The weight of the nation's expectations was ever present, but there was a new force at play, something intangible, an ancient energy lurking just beneath the polished surface of the Oval Office. Over the past few weeks, Ethan had noticed subtle changes. It started with small, inexplicable noises, the faintest rustle in the walls, the flickering of the lights, a sudden chill in the air that no heating system could explain. It was more than just the building, though. It was as if the White House itself held memories, deep and unsettling, that refused to stay hidden. People spoke of the ghosts of past presidents, but those were just stories, weren't they? Legends crafted to add intrigue to an already historical place. Yet, as the days passed, these stories began to feel eerily real. One evening, Ethan had wandered down to the basement, following a series of whispers he couldn't ignore. The long, dimly lit hallway led him to a forgotten storage room where old presidential memorabilia and forgotten archives gathered dust. Among the stacks of files, he found a peculiar set of journals, worn leather-bound and yellowed with age. They were from the early 1800s, belonging to a president who had mysteriously disappeared, President Henry Wycliffe. The journal spoke of strange occurrences, eerie visions, and cryptic messages passed down from one administration to the next, warning of a darkness that had been buried deep beneath the White House. Ethan was skeptical, but a sense of dread gnawed at him as he read further. There was one passage that stood out, a message that felt like a direct warning to him. "The House remembers, the House knows, and what was buried must rise again." Ever since he had read those words, the whispers had grown louder, more persistent, and now, in the stillness of the Oval Office, they were beginning to feel like a presence, something watching him, waiting. A knock on the door snapped him from his thoughts. His chief of staff, Anna Westbrook, stepped in, a worried look on her face. "Mr. President, there's something you need to see, the White House security footage. It's strange." Ethan followed her to the security room, where a monitor flickered with an unsettling scene. The footage showed the hallways of the White House, long and empty, until something moved, something that shouldn't be there. A shadow, tall and thin, drifting just out of sight, but always there, always watching. Ethan's blood ran cold. The presence wasn't just in his mind. It was real. The following days were marked by an eerie sense of tension. The White House, once a place of security, now felt like a looming presence in itself, an ancient structure filled with unseen eyes. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to make sense of everything. The shadow on the security footage, the whispers that followed him, and the chilling sensation that no matter where he went, the walls were listening. Every night, the disturbances grew more intense. It started with small occurrences, objects shifting on their own, doors creaking open when no one was around, and the constant hum of static that seemed to fill the halls. It wasn't the sound of malfunctioning equipment, but something older, more primal. The very air felt charged with an unseen energy, as if the house itself was waking up. One night, as Ethan sat in his study, trying to concentrate on a briefing, the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness for a brief moment. He hadn't expected to be startled by the dark. He was used to long nights spent in solitude. But something was different this time. A low, guttural sound resonated from somewhere in the building, almost like a groan, as if the house itself were in pain. He stood and moved toward the door, but as he touched the doorknob, the whispering began again, faint but unmistakable. "Help me help us." The voice was distant yet so close, as if it came from within the walls themselves. Ethan's heart raced. The voice wasn't just a figment of his imagination, it was real. His grip tightened on the doorknob, his mind torn between investigating and running. In the hallway, the air grew heavy, and he noticed something he hadn't before. An old portrait, one he had walked past countless times. It depicted President Wycliffe, the one from the journals, staring down at him with a gaze that seemed almost accusatory. The painting was barely illuminated by the weak light of the hallway, but in its shadow, something was off. The edges of the portrait flickered, as though they were fading and then reappearing, like a glitch in the world itself. Suddenly, the whispering grew louder. The words were clearer now, and they sent a chill down Ethan's spine. "The truth lies beneath the oval." The floor beneath him rumbled, faint at first, like the vibrations of a distant earthquake. He spun around, his breath caught in his throat. The whisper had stopped, but something was wrong. Something was moving beneath the White House. He rushed to the nearest staircase and descended into the basement. The deeper he went, the colder the air became. The hallways twisted, as if the layout itself had changed since he had last been down there. The shadows seemed to stretch and grow as he passed, warping and shifting in unnatural ways. He couldn't shake the feeling that the house was alive, breathing around him, waiting. At the end of the hall, he found it a hidden door, one he had never seen before. It was covered in dust, almost as if it had been sealed for years. The ancient lock seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the key, he realized, had always been in his hand. With a hesitant breath, Ethan unlocked the door. It creaked open, revealing a narrow staircase that descended into a vast underground chamber. The air smelled of earth and something older, something forgotten. As he stepped inside, the walls seemed to close in, and the whispering returned, louder than ever. "The truth is here. The truth will free us." Ethan took a step forward, the weight of the words pressing down on him. The chamber was vast, filled with forgotten artifacts and old weathered documents. But at the center, on a pedestal, stood a single object, a strange dark relic that seemed to hum with dark energy. As his hand reached for it, the ground beneath him trembled violently. The shadows around him began to take form, twisting into something darker, something that shouldn't exist. The whispers rose to a deafening roar. Ethan could hear only one thing now, the voice of President Wycliffe echoing through the chamber. "You woke us now, we are free." Ethan's hand hovered just above the dark relic. The air in the chamber was thick, pressing in around him like a suffocating force. The shadows had fully taken shape now, tall, featureless figures with eyes that glowed faintly beneath their hoods. They circled him, moving in unison, as if the very fabric of time had unraveled around them. The moment his fingers brushed the object on the pedestal, a surge of energy shot through him, electrifying every nerve in his body. The relic pulsed with an otherworldly glow, and for a brief instant, he saw a vision, images flashing before his eyes at lightning speed. The White House in flames, its walls crumbling, the statues in the garden turning to dust. And then, a figure that seemed to hover between life and death, its features warped by an ancient curse. President Wycliffe's face. The vision faded, leaving Ethan gasping for breath, his heart pounding in his chest. The shadows had stopped moving. The figures were still now, standing silently, watching him with eyes that glinted with a knowing malice. A cold, malevolent presence filled the chamber, and he realized too late that he had awakened something that should have remained forgotten. The whispers had stopped. The silence was oppressive, suffocating. Then, as if responding to his thoughts, the voice returned. But this time, it was no longer a whisper. It was clear, sharp, and undeniably real. It came from all directions, echoing through the chamber like 1,000 voices, blending into one. "The house remembers. We have waited now, you will remember too." Ethan's breath hitched as the walls of the chamber seemed to close in. The ground trembled beneath him once more, but this time, it wasn't the result of an earthquake. The very foundation of the White House was shifting, rearranging, as if the building itself had become alive. The shadows began to swirl around him, encasing him in an ever-tightening ring. He could feel their coldness, their ancient presence, pressing against him from all sides. A sudden flash of light blinded him. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing not in the chamber, but back in the Oval Office. The same room, but everything had changed. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of decay. The once bright furnishings were now draped in cobwebs, the windows blacked out, the walls cracked and peeling. At the desk a figure sat, draped in a dark cloak. The figure raised its head, revealing the hollow eyes of President Wycliffe, now nothing more than a skull covered in rotting flesh. The face smiled, its teeth yellowed and sharp. "Welcome, Mr. President," it said, its voice a guttural rasp that sent chills down Ethan's spine. Before he could react, the figure stood, and the walls around him seemed to tremble in response. The sound of distant laughter filled the room, low, sinister, echoing from all corners. The laughter of those who had come before him. The laughter of those who had known the truth of the White House. The truth that had been buried for so long. And as the laughter grew louder, Ethan understood. The house wasn't haunted by spirits. It was haunted by history itself, by the sins of those who had ruled from within its walls. The shadows, the whispers, the figures, they were not just ghosts. They were the souls of the past, trapped within the very structure of the White House, waiting for someone to release them. He was no longer the president. He was part of the history now, a part of the house. Ethan's mind spiraled into darkness as the figure of Wycliffe reached out toward him, its cold fingers brushing his face. The world around him dissolved into an endless void, and the only sound that remained was the echoing laughter. The White House had claimed him, and with that, the story would begin anew. Morning arrived, though it seemed indifferent to the horrors that had unfolded within the White House. The world outside continued on, unaware of the nightmare that had taken place behind its stately walls. In the Oval Office, everything appeared normal, too normal. The sun streamed through the windows, casting warm light on the resolute desk, which had been meticulously cleaned and polished. The air, once thick with tension and dread, was now strangely calm. The only sign of what had transpired was a faint, lingering chill that seemed to hang in the corners of the room. The staff arrived, as they always did, with no knowledge of the horrors that had unfolded the night before. The president was nowhere to be found. The secret recordings, the journals of President Wycliffe, and the eerie footage from the security cameras had all mysteriously disappeared, as though they had never existed. The basement, once filled with strange noises and whispers, was now quiet, as though the house itself had returned to a peaceful slumber. But deep beneath the White House, in the forgotten chamber, the relic remained. The shadows, still but waiting for the next person curious enough to uncover what was buried. And somewhere, echoing softly through the corridors of the White House, the whispers returned. They were faint but unmistakable. The House remembers, and we are watching. As the sun set on another ordinary day in Washington, the White House stood silent once more, its secrets hidden beneath layers of history. And so the White House waited, its ancient secrets concealed in the shadows, ever patient, ever watchful, until the next soul arrived, curious enough to disturb its restless silence.